Hello, marvelous people. Today I have one of my more interesting videos, in my opinion, and it's about how life isn't defined by just genetics or your genes, that it's actually a lot more complicated than that. And a field called quantum biology, which is really starting to mature in the past 20 years or so, is really creating frameworks to understand that better. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So, initially, life was thought of from a genetic perspective in the 1800s, whenever Gregor Mendel was doing research on pea plants, and he came up with heredity from yellow and green pea plants. And this was before the discovery of DNA, so it's not too bad that he kind of misinterpreted the results because mechanisms weren't really understood that well back then. But what he got was that he knew there was some type of genotype, and that the phenotype in this case was green and yellow peas, and that whenever he mixed those or bred those peas together, you had yellow peas that were made, or you had a mix of genotypes, which would create a green phenotype because the green allele was the dominant one, and then you would have one that had two dominant alleles, just like you have two recessive alleles. And that's very simplistic, and that's a good first try at it. However, life is actually a lot more complicated than this. The only reason he got these results was because he specifically bred these peas to just produce successively yellow pea plants or successively green pea plants. So he kind of manufactured these plants to get these results. So his interpretation and how everybody interpreted it after was really a little misguided. So scientists try to repeat this after, and what you actually find in nature is that you get a spectrum of different colors of pea plants. Just like no matter what your genes are in nature, you're going to have a spectrum of results because of epigenetics and because of environmental factors and nutrition and all kind of stuff. So what we're understanding now is that DNA isn't really a blueprint. We've already gotten the whole human genome, and we thought that was going to lead to people having credit cards with their genetic code on it, and that would lead to all kind of great treatments. But that didn't happen because it turns out that we're a lot more than just our genetic code. Because how that code produces proteins, and then those protein interactions mix together in different ways. They're expressed in different levels, and they actually have computational abilities beyond the code, which you can get into epigenetics and stuff. So it's more about plasticity than it is about the DNA being a blueprint. But that's good, I think, because that means you're not determined, your life isn't determined by your genes, that your choices in life and the environment you put yourself in and what you choose to eat and everything actually will dictate how your body evolves and grows. So we're going to get into that more in the next few slides. But right here, if you want to look at, I just have a diagram showing Mendel's view and how genes are a more flexible system. And in Mendel's view, traits were simple, but traits can actually blend and are co-dominant sometimes. Genes can interact together, as I said, through epigenetics and stuff like that. And emergent phenomena can dictate the expression of genes, and then also the environment you're in can shape the expression. So a more accurate way of looking at this is that DNA, RNA, and sugars, lipids, so that's post-translational modifications you're going to have to the proteins. It's add sugars onto it so they bind and have different emergent structures. So all of these you can think of as agents. And then of course you're going to have genetic regulatory pathways that have emergent structures, and then that creates epigenetics that will actually control the DNA and these agents and how they're expressed. And also, what connects all this together is bioelectric patterns. And I think that's where adaptation can occur because, like I said in previous videos, if you have a negative mutation in an organism, then that organism can actually make the choice to change its lifestyle that might turn that negative mutation into a positive mutation. And this goes into what Darwin thought at the end of his life and not really what he came up with in his first ideas, which eventually led to neo-Darwinism. So moving along, how this all fits together in quantum biology and how this creates a holistic framework is in previous videos I've explained quantum mechanics with water, and a reason why that's a good analogy is because you can explain the double slit experiment. It creates an interference pattern. And then I've also explained how a dodecahedron fractal, or a lot of different type of fractals, are a good mathematical tool to approximate energy landscapes. And this is just a paper here you can look at. You can look up many papers to see this. But the reason why this is a good tool is that it can kind of represent space and quantize space so that you can actually approximate all the energies and the different interactions that are happening on a quantum level, because at the quantum level things are acting like waves. So really you can think about space or space-time, whatever you want to call it, as almost like a fluid. So it has fluid dynamics that explain it more. And if we use that mathematical framework for biology, I think that will render a more holistic framework. And with our computational ability, with AI and everything else, I think that we can actually do this to come up with better treatment strategies, which will be in the future. So moving on, one protein that I've studied a lot, these are some of my results, is a protein called galectin-3, and it has an intrinsically disordered protein. I've talked about chaotic or intrinsically disordered agents or proteins before. RNA and DNA can be intrinsically disordered, and that means that part of their function is that they're naturally disordered so that they can aggregate together and organize water in something called liquid-liquid phase separation. And this is a visualization of Plateau's laws. So Plateau's laws are how bubbles come together, and science has already known that the architecture of cells come together in a similar way, and also water droplets come together in a similar way. So when these galectin proteins, these intrinsically disordered proteins that form biomolecular condensates, aggregate together, they make these little bitty biomolecular condensates or droplets. They have like a droplet structure. And this is kind of just a two-dimensional view of the cells. And then if you grow them more, cancer cells have something that can go against contact inhibition. So normally cells will have contact inhibition, and this is how your tissues know when to stop growing. They feel around and they know, oh, I'm contacting this tissue or these fibers, so that means I need to stop growing. Cancer cells don't do that. So if you keep growing cells in a dish for 5 days, as you can see, they form a multi-layer of cells, and I show that right here in the depth coding that shows the red is closer to you, and that it goes red, yellow, green, and blue at the bottom, which you can't see the blue. But this is just data showing it's a multi-layer of cells. And you can see that these little droplets, these biomolecular condensate droplets made of the galectin-3 protein, aggregate together in this emergent framework and allow the cells to grow vertically on the y-axis. And my hypothesis is it has similar dynamics as Plateau's laws because you can easily visualize bubbles in 2 dimensions, but then in 3 dimensions, it in a multi-layer of bubbles, obviously that those angles that you can clearly see aren't really visible before. So that's what you're seeing right here versus the 1 day of growth. So this is one example of a protein that causes biomolecular condensates, but actually many different proteins and RNA molecules can form biomolecular condensates. And one aspect that science is currently looking at biomolecular condensates is for quantum biology, because what these condensates can do is organize aromatic residues or chromophores. They can align them together so that you can actually have coherent light transfer. So this happens for photosynthesis, we know. So it's being looked at for photosynthesis, which I'll get to on the next slide. But I think it's happening everywhere because evolution is inevitably going to exploit any mechanisms like this that are happening everywhere. So the way that it works is you have all these proteins that have aromatic residues, and they're intrinsically disordered, so they can aggregate and organize themselves in protein structures that are separated within a water structure, and then that creates a structured environment that isn't totally aqueous like a liquid, but isn't like structured water like an ice crystal. It's almost like something in between. So it organizes, it dynamically organizes these proteins in arrangements that allow things to easily be incorporated in and things to easily be pushed out, so to speak, so you can have almost like a computational ability. And then whenever it aligns these proteins, it can actually align the aromatic residues to have something called coherent light transfer, or that's called superradiance. So that's a way that the cells or the protein condensates within the cells can kind of talk to each other and transfer information so that biology has another level of information to compute. And I really think that this is going to end up being one of the main mechanisms for consciousness, or for really the better term for it is agency. Because when most people think of consciousness, they think of human consciousness, but cells compute information and have their own type of consciousness for the environment that they live in. And if you think your brain is made up of neurons, of cells, and that totality is what creates your consciousness. So the molecular way that they work is really working everywhere. It's just that cells have their own consciousness or their own information transfer for whatever they do, for their type of agency, whatever goal-oriented work or goal-oriented behavior you're trying to do. So one neuron is going to have different goal-oriented behavior of your whole brain, and your liver is going to have different goal-oriented behavior as your brain and other organs in your whole body. So that's more speculative, but I think that the research is out there, and it's just a matter of time before this is coming out. I actually have some chapters being published about this coming up in the next few months. So, but what's heavily researched is the quantum effects in photosynthesis and bird navigation. And there's a lot of scientific research being done on liquid-liquid phase separation and disordered proteins and how they can incorporate into these mechanisms for photosynthesis. That's well known how plants use light to make energy, and bird navigations, how birds use the Earth magnetic field to navigate around the Earth like a GPS system. So the Earth's magnetic field and the light from the sun is obviously quantum particles acting like a wave. So you can understand from everything I said how it can be incorporated into this system. So the take home from this is that quantum biology is an emerging field with realistic and understandable frameworks, which I have explained, and it will unravel a holistic view of biology that will render more holistic treatment strategies if we can start thinking about it in this way. Not really a reductionist point of view. The reductionist point of view is important to understand the individual agents, but to understand the emergent frameworks and the emergent behavior that creates goal-oriented behavior, we have to view it from a holistic standpoint. So you have to view it from a holistic standpoint and a reductionist standpoint, and that goes back to my flow chart, which I showed at the beginning. And this is just a cool kind of cartoon of what a network of biomolecular condensates might look like. And I just think it looks really cool. So thank you, fabulous people, and have a wonderful day.